What is the foreign national employee's role in the PERM labor certification process and the I-140 petition process? That's what we're talking about today at Live at Lunch. My name is Emily Sumner with Sumner Immigration Law, and I'm so glad you're joining us, whether you're joining us live or catching the replay. This video is designed for employers and employees who are considering beginning or interested in beginning the employment-based green card process. That is the PERM labor certification process. That's the first stage of the process. In our video last week, we talked about the employer's role in the PERM labor certification process. And this week, we're focusing on the foreign national's role in the process for the PERM labor certification and the subsequent I-140 petition. So let's get into it. The one thing to keep in mind is that this really is the PERM labor certification process really is an employer-driven process. That means that a lot of the information, the documentation will come from the employer, and the employer ultimately is the one to oversee the recruitment process, to receive resumes, things like that. However, the foreign national employee, and by the way, you don't have to be an employee to go through this process. It is possible to not yet be employed by the company. But anyway, the foreign national who's benefiting from this process absolutely has an important role to play. One of those roles to play is to be aware of the process and have a realistic expectation of how long it's going to take. Right now, realistically, from the time you start the PERM labor certification process until you have an approval will probably be at least 2 to 2.5 years. Honestly, probably closer to 2.5, if not closer to 3 years. And we talked some about the timing before in our previous video, but it's going to take a while to get through. So the reason that I'm saying that is because A, it's good to have a clear expectation, but B, in our practice, we want to set things up really, really well with a really strong foundation from the beginning. So we're going to ask both the employer and the employee for some key documentation. And you may be thinking, Emily, we don't need that until the I-140 petition process, but we want to make sure that you have it now, that it's available now, because we do not want to get to the I-140 stage of the process and realize that you, as the foreign national, cannot get the required letters of experience, for example. So going back to your overall role in the process, like I said, number one thing to keep in mind is that it's essential that you have a realistic expectation of how long it's going to take. Number two is eligibility. A lot of times when we are working, or always when we're working with a client, a corporate client, to initiate this process, one of the conversations that we have is this an appropriate process to go through? Is it really going to benefit you? Meaning the employer and the employee. And by that, I mean, sometimes people think that starting the green card process is a way for the foreign national to be able to stay in the United States or to continue working. And it can be, that can be an appropriate step to take, but it's not always. I had that conversation last week with another client that this really is not the way that, a way for a person to stay in the United States long or short term or medium term. Anyway, is this an appropriate process? Are there other options available? Other green card options, whether that's family-based or other potentially employment-based green card options. So we definitely look at the person's current situation, and the foreign national is typically involved in that part of the conversation, at least in our practice. The second thing is we look at the requirements for the position. And it's important to note that it is the employer who establishes the minimum requirements for the position. So in the PERM labor certification process, we're looking at what are the minimum requirements for the process, not what does the foreign national have, what is preferred, that kind of thing. We're looking at what are the minimum requirements for the process. But a key part of that analysis is, does the foreign national who is ultimately going to hold this position have those minimum requirements? Because if you don't, then when we get to the I-140 stage of the process, or even sooner, the process will fail because we won't be able to show that you have the minimum degree, whether that's a bachelor's degree in a specific field of study or a master's degree. So we look at both of those in tandem. A, what are the actual minimum requirements for the position? And B, does the employee actually have them? So the employee is definitely involved in that conversation. We also want to make sure that you, and I mentioned this a minute ago, that you as the foreign national employee are able to get the required documentation. So when I say that, I mean documentation of your education. So that includes copies of degrees, transcripts, We may ask you if this is not the first immigration process that you've gone through. We'll probably ask if you haven't sent it already, if you already have a credentials evaluation, if your degree is from an institution overseas. So that is an evaluation that says that your education is equivalent to X type of degree, US degree here in the United States. So we'll ask for that. And experience letters. So the experience letters are critically important because those experience letters from previous employers are what we use to show that you meet the minimum experience requirements for the position and any specific skills or technology, any other specific information requirements that you have that your employer has set forth for the position. So we got to have those experience letters. It is possible logistically to proceed with the recruitment and even filing the PERM without having those experience letters in hand. But like I said, you do not want to get to the I-140 petition and then find out that you can't get them. On those experience letters, typically there's specific requirements for those. They need to be on letterhead. They need to be pretty detailed with the job duties, any specific requirements or skills that you used in the position, the exact dates of employment needs to be signed. Doesn't have to be original. An original letter, but we have to have those letters. So in our practice, we almost always require that the foreign national give those to us before we start the process, because then we know we have a really solid foundation to work on, and we're not just assuming that those letters will be available down the road when they in fact might not be. So we'll ask you for that type of documentation as well, and that's why. The other thing that it's really helpful for the foreign national to share with us is information about their immigration history. So it may not be, again, it may not be relevant rather in this particular moment when we're filing the PERM labor certification, but it could be down the road when it's time to file the I-485. So things like information about your immigration history, like have you ever been on a J1 and you're subject to the 2-year home residency requirement? It's helpful to know about visa denials, petition denials, unauthorized work, things like that, that you probably don't necessarily want to talk about a lot because it's not super comfortable and you may be concerned that it would cause a problem, and it may cause a problem down the road. But the earlier we know about it, the sooner we know about it, the sooner we can come up with a plan to address it or to have a realistic conversation and say, this is the likely outcome of this particular action. So to the extent that you can let us know about that ahead of time, that is really, really helpful. And honestly, there are many times when a client will, be afraid to tell us or not be afraid, but whatever reason, whatever it is, however they feel, they'll tell us that they have, X particular situation in their history, whether it's a criminal charge or a previous immigration violation. And they tell us that, and it ends up not being a problem at all. So you don't know. It's kind of like going to the doctor where you tell them everything, even if you think it's not relevant, because that could potentially be helpful for the doctor. Same thing when you're talking to your immigration lawyer. The more information we have in general, the better, and the better equipped we are to guide you successfully through the process. So like I said, the employer sets the actual minimum requirements, but we work closely with the foreign national as well to make sure they actually have those requirements. Once we have those requirements in place, we have obtained what's called the prevailing wage determination from the Department of Labor. We're ready to start recruitment. During that process, the foreign national is not involved in the recruitment process. So the foreign national is not receiving resumes, is not reviewing resumes, is not interviewing people. That all needs to be done by ideally HR or somebody who is not the foreign national. The foreign national cannot be involved in that particular process. And then finally, right before we file the labor certification application, in our practice, we ask both the employer and employee to sign off on it, to review it and make sure the information is correct, let us know of any changes, that type of thing. So that's the PERM labor certification process. Once we get to the I-140 petition, because you already, like I said, in our practice, and different lawyers do this different ways, but in our practice, because we already have gotten the key information from you, the key documentation, meaning the educational documentation, the letters of experience, that type of thing. Once we get to the I-140 stage, once the labor certification is approved, we really don't need that much documentation from the foreign national or from the employer, actually. It's a pretty streamlined, straightforward process. We likely would need your most recent W-2s and your updated pay stubs to prove ability to pay, but that's kind of it. If you've already given us your letters of experience and your educational documents, the hard part is done. So that's why we like to get that done early on in the process to make sure, like I said, that we have a solid foundation that is designed to maximize the chances of success. We can't anytime, nobody can make a guarantee anytime, but that's the reason we like to do that. And like I said, the I-140 process has been streamlined and very much less stressful because we have that foundation in place. So I hope that you have found this information helpful, this information about the foreign nationals role in the PERM labor certification process and the I-140 process. If you have, I hope that you'll share this video with a friend or a colleague. Make sure that you subscribe to our channel. If you have questions, put them in the comments. We're happy to answer questions as much as we can. I can't give legal advice in these videos or in comments, but I'm happy to help as much as I can. If you are thinking about starting the green card process, whether you are an employer or a foreign national employee, we would love to talk with you in more detail about the process. You can contact us. There'll be contact information at the slide following this video, on the slide following this video, with how to contact us to set up a time for consultation, and we would love to talk to you. Otherwise, my name is Emily Sumner with Sumner Immigration Law. We help clients around the United States and around the world with family-based and employment-based immigration cases, and we would love to help you next. Until next time, my name is Emily Sumner.